Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's virtual event, The Future of Benefits, sponsored by Novo Nordisk, CloudMD, and Medivy Blue Cross. Let me share a little bit about our sponsors. Novo Nordisk is a global healthcare company founded in 1923 and headquartered just outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. Their purpose is to drive change to defeat diabetes and other serious chronic diseases such as obesity and rare blood and rare endocrine diseases. CloudMD delivers a comprehensive, connected, and personalized experience that innovatively delivers fast and direct access to better care. Their whole person approach places an emphasis on continuity of care across mental, physical, and workplace safety. This enables them to deliver superior clinical health outcomes, consistent high satisfaction, and measurable business ROI. Medivy Blue Cross is a premier all-in-one carrier that provides health, dental, travel, life, and disability benefits. Medivy Blue Cross is part of Medivy, a health solutions partner committed to improving the well-being of Canadians. As a not-for-profit organization, they don't have shareholders. Instead, they proudly invest in communities to help address some of Canada's most pressing healthcare challenges. I'm Kristen Dougal, Director of Meetings and Events for Benefits and Pensions Monitor, and I will be your host today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to review. This is an example of the attendee control panel. You should see something similar on your computer screen in the upper right-hand corner. Use the orange arrow to open and close your control panel. Use the audio pane to select your preferred audio. Choose computer audio to use your computer microphone and speakers, or choose the phone call option and use your telephone to dial in using the information provided. If you have questions for today's presenters, please type them into the question pane of the control panel. You can submit them at any time during today's session. We'll be collecting them and addressing them during the audience Q&A portion at the end of the event. Use the handouts pane to download the available documents. You do have access to download each of the speaker presentations anytime before the webinar ends. Please note that all attendees are in listen-only mode as we'll be recording this webinar. It will be available to view on our website in the next few days. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to play a short video that will help set the stage for her presentation. So now let me introduce you to our first speaker. Our first speaker is Nicole Ardeal. Nicole joined the insurance industry in 1997 as an employee benefits specialist with a major Canadian insurance carrier. 5 years later, she started her own insurance practice and began to specialize in employee benefits. Nicole's goal is to provide meaningful, sustainable, and fairly priced plans to local business owners, and she believes strongly in employee education and engagement. She also has a passion for the mental health and well being of not only herself, but for everyone around her. Throughout her 25-year career, Nicole has supported hundreds of Vancouver Island business owners and thousands of local employees. So let's get started. Nicole, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kristen, for your introduction and for playing our video. I'm honored to be asked to present at this event, and thank you all very much for being here. I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen and Wasanic peoples on whose land I live, work, create, and play. When I told my father, a 74-year-old retired RCMP officer, originally from Southern Alberta, that I was presenting on the topic of obesity and the future of benefits in the workplace, he asked me why. I told him that as a 25-year veteran of the insurance industry, this is an area that I think I can affect change. I've also learned more about fat stigma and feel that I can bring attention to this sensitive and conventionally taboo subject. He then asked me, "Are you fat?" Well, I stammered, "Parts of my body are fat." To which he replied, "Well then, work it off." Now, I love my father dearly. He is an attentive and devoted dad and grandfather. He has been supportive of me in so many ways, even coming to watch every single soccer game I've ever played over 30 years, despite the fact that he thinks the sport is incredibly boring. However, he, like so many people of his generation and many generations after his, carries a misinformed and often negative bias about weight, obesity, and what life is like for those that live in bigger bodies. What my dad said to me and what my dad believes is one of the reasons that I'm here. Because to break down bias and reduce stigma, to support inclusion, to examine the future of benefits and how all of this fits together, we need to start somewhere. And that somewhere today is here. So first, a little bit more background. As per my bio, I've been in the insurance industry and specifically the employee benefits sector for many years. Even as far back as the late 90s when I started, I remember being irked by the term lifestyle drugs. This is a phrase used by insurance carriers for a grouping of drugs that support a manner of living. From a paper published in 2000, lifestyle drugs are drugs used for non-health problems or for conditions that lie at the boundary between a health need and a lifestyle wish. Although this quote is 22 years old, I can attest that the term still exists in the insurance vernacular. Anti-obesity medication is typically included in this classification, along with drugs for fertility, erectile dysfunction, and smoking cessation. Use of the word lifestyle suggests that these conditions are based on life decisions, and therefore poses the question as to whether drugs for these lifestyle choices should be covered on a benefit plan. It is possible that lifestyle drugs are not on the eligible list of many extended healthcare plans in Canada unless there has been a deliberate decision to include them. Because of this omission, lifestyle drugs can be a subject that is not discussed in the benefit world. Thankfully, this is changing. Fast forward 20 years, I was attending a national drug forum back in December 2020. The presentation was also about obesity, and I remember hearing the term lifestyle drugs. My ears pricked up. It was a pivotal moment for me. It finally hit me how wrong this word is. Weight is not a behavior, and obesity is not a lifestyle choice. This presentation was the catalyst for me to get moving toward change. Since that December, I've done a deep dive on the research and uncovered a library of evidence-based resources. One of the things I've learned in this research is that the word obesity is actually offensive to some people who live in bigger bodies. The term obese is derived from the Latin obesus, which means having eaten oneself fat. which inherently blames fat people for their bodies. And the term overweight implies that there is an objectively correct weight for everybody. The word health also carries complicated insinuations and implications linked with moral virtue, obligation, and the pervasive and very profitable diet culture. I want to acknowledge this at the front of my presentation to accentuate how complicated and intricate this topic is. However, I will be using the words obese and health throughout today, and this is not meant to be disrespectful, but it is because we're looking at this today through the lens of obesity as a complex chronic disease where excess body fat impairs the traditional definition of health. First of all, the science of obesity is changing. We now know how to better measure obesity, which is not just relying on the outdated body mass index or BMI. We know that obesity is a complex chronic disease in which excess body fat impairs health, increases the risk of long-term medical complications, and reduces lifespan. We also know that obesity is caused by the complex interplay of genetic, metabolic, behavioral, and environmental factors. And the new clinical practice guidelines promote a shift in obesity treatment that focuses on patient-centric care, which includes a patient's overall health and experience, rather than just focusing solely on their weight. However, despite all of these progressions in understanding and scientific proof, there remains a significant amount of misinformation and bias. The very structure of today's benefit plans still discriminates against those living with obesity. You can see the difference right here. As I've mentioned, and as so eloquently and heartbreakingly demonstrated by the video earlier, diabetes, high blood pressure, mental health, etc., are treated as chronic diseases, while obesity is still considered a lifestyle condition. Medications for diseases on the left are standard, but not so for obesity. The way in which claimants with these diseases are managed is completely different, with actual programs and medical management. Whether intended or not, the design of our typical benefit plans discriminate against those living with obesity. And there's more disturbing news. In the 2022 Benefits Canada Healthcare Survey, in the section on discrimination and DEI in the workplace, 41% of plan members living with obesity experienced discrimination. And members who have been discriminated against were twice as likely to experience extremely high levels of stress. And this could very well be showing up in the drug claims on the plans that do offer coverage for evidence-based anti-obesity medication. From the 2022 HBM Plus Drug Trends and Strategic Insights review of comorbidities with obesity medication claimants, mental health was the condition with the highest prevalence rates. Nearly 45% of the obesity medication claimants also used medications for anxiety and depression in 2021. This compares to 25% for non-obesity claimants. So even though there are plan designs showing promise and progression, there is a clear link between people living in bigger bodies and the devastating effect on their mental health. When I consider the future of benefit plans, this is an area that needs to change. And there are indications that change is coming. HBM Plus, the Canadian Pharmacy Benefits Manager who provided the stats on the last slide, is, quote, currently working on the modernization of the category traditionally labeled as lifestyle drugs, end quote. Now, I'm not a doctor or a research analyst or a medical specialist in this area whatsoever. So you might be asking why I am here talking about this today. I've been a champion of supporting mental health for many years now and have been working hard to reduce stigma surrounding this very important topic. And in the last 2+ years, I've seen the collective work and support of so many Canadians gain momentum as we turn the tide on talking openly about mental health conditions. I feel it's time to shift my focus to an underrepresented area. My reason for raising awareness is to try to change the future of our benefit plans. As mentioned, there are parts of my body that are fat. However, my excess fat is not impairing my health or lifestyle. I do not require treatment or support. The only thing my extra fat affects is my clothes closet because I can't fit into everything anymore. The reason I'm talking about this is because I am an ally for those that live in bigger bodies and those that deal with fat shaming. I don't need for my excess fat to be impairing my health in order to help educate and collaborate on this issue. Just as I don't need to be living with depression to be an ally for those with mental health issues, or I don't need to have a cancer diagnosis to raise funds and participate in the 5K breast cancer run. Allies are like bridges, and they take action to bridge gaps. And from 25 years in the employee benefits industry, I have identified a gap that needs a bridge. So why is it that no one else is talking about this? In my opinion, fear. Apparently, fear of snakes is at the top of the list for Canadians. This may be true, but a fear that does not show up on that list is the fear of addressing uncomfortable topics. All of you here today are people leaders. And I hope I'm not the first to break it to you, but when you decided to become a people leader, you ticked the terms and conditions box that agreed to addressing uncomfortable topics. And don't get me wrong, I too find this an uncomfortable topic. I've been on the virtual stage several times in the last year plus talking about this, and it is not getting much easier for me. This issue is fraught with misunderstanding, judgment, blame, and resentment. We all know someone who lives in a bigger body. We may be one of them. And we all know someone who scorns them or us because of it. This issue and the harmful stigma surrounding it is so prevalent, but no one is talking about it. I've built my practice on the adage of talk the talk and walk the walk. So despite that this is a deeply uncomfortable topic for all of us, I am trying to do my little bit to raise awareness. So even if only a quarter of you think about this differently after today, then we are better off than we were an hour ago. It is critically important to note that this is not simply a crusade to lose weight. Obesity, when described as a chronic condition, is one where excess body fat impairs health. The BMI is an often used and often criticized tool used to measure body fat composition. What it does not do is measure health. A high BMI doesn't necessarily mean a person is unhealthy. Just the same as a normal BMI doesn't mean a person is healthy. I'm sure we all know many people who look great on the outside, but are a complete wreck on the inside. Our focus needs to be on an overall health and experience rather than just solely on weight. The key is to explore and find the healthy weight, not an ideal BMI, nor trying to fit all bodies into one size and shape. Size diversity is a real thing, and people's body sizes are as distinct and varied as our height, hair color, skin color, shoe size, etc. So that brings us to another question. How is this applicable to you, your business, and the organizations and people that you work with? What is it that you can do about this? In my opinion, the answer is threefold, and here is your call to action. First and foremost, reduce your own bias. Read the research, acknowledge the science. Acknowledge and accept that obesity is a complex, chronic disease. Educate yourself about different body shapes and sizes, body positivity, and points of view from people who will share their experiences of fat shaming. Lindy West is an American author and comedian whose writing topics include feminism, sexism, and fat shaming. In her groundbreaking 2016 book Shrill, in the chapter, Hello, I Am Fat, she writes about sitting at a table in a bar trying to explain her point of view to her straight-sized male boss. Say both of our chairs are broken. If my chair collapses under me right now, people will assume it's because I'm fat. But if your chair collapses under you, it's because you sat on a broken chair. Do you get it? Next, understand that obesity has a cost. Agree that addressing this issue is a priority. Consider an evidence-based obesity modeling tool to understand the cost to your business. A specific modeling tool based on the demographics of any given group will show the numbers. the cost of meds for high blood pressure, susceptibility to depression, claims for CPAP machines due to sleep apnea, or lost productivity due to absenteeism or disability claims. Just like any other chronic disease, there could be increased costs associated with obesity. I have personally used a tool in starting the conversation with several clients in the last year and a half. For example, with 120 life group, the numbers spoke for themselves. Over the next 5 years, the tool predicted that obesity would cost them $1.8 million. The most notable costs, $914,000 for sleep disorders, $401,000 for mental health issues, and $260,000 for cardiovascular disease. Divided by 120 employees, that's an average cost of $15,000 each. This tool introduced a concern that my client didn't know they had to pay attention to. And the result? We added evidence-based anti-obesity medications to the plan and shared communication material that HR could distribute to the employees. Thirdly, reduce stigma and remove barriers. As mentioned, add evidence-based anti-obesity meds to the list of covered drugs on your plan. Ensure they are not called lifestyle drugs, and request a high enough annual maximum so the medication cost will not be a barrier for employees. Ask the insurance carriers to change their language and remove the term lifestyle drugs. We use healthy body instead. And if you do already have coverage for AOMs on your plan and you are able to see that an employee or dependent has a claim for these drugs, be supportive. Look at it in a positive way and see that it is evidence that someone is taking a very courageous step to seek help and support. A couple of years ago, I had a client that noticed an AOM claim on their drug report. And because of the small size of the group, they were able to identify who was taking it. Sadly, their reaction was not a positive one. Firstly, the cost of the drug was very high and they were unhappy that this claim would impact their healthcare rates. Secondly, and probably more importantly, they told me the expense wasn't worth it. The drug wasn't working as the employee was still fat. I'm sure they would not react that same way if one of their employees needed a cancer drug or a drug to treat their rheumatoid arthritis. Next, create a communication plan to help normalize obesity in the workplace. There are so many tools available. Promote the employee and family assistance programs and cognitive behavioral therapy services. Recruit ambassadors from within to help promote and support. Team members who feel included and who see their leaders recognize their issues in an empathetic way will be way more engaged and way more willing to go the extra mile. Learn how to talk about obesity with others. Even if that means sensitivity training around the words, learn to be open and non-judgmental. Be tactful, but don't be shy. Steer away from the unhelpful and disrespectful solutions such as diet or exercise suggestions. Acknowledge that fat shaming and weight stigma is actually harmful to health and may drive weight gain. Weight stigma has been linked to the increased risk of mental health conditions such as disordered eating, emotional distress, negative body image, low self-esteem, and depression. You would not tell a person living with depression to cheer up or a person living with asthma to breathe deeper. Therefore, telling a person who lives with obesity to eat less and move more is not helpful, practical, or useful. As you can see, I am passionate about this subject, but learning about obesity and fat shaming has not been without my own trepidation and unease. I've had to check my own bias. I come from a life of sport and frequent activity. My group of best girlfriends are all from that same world of performing at a high level in our teens, 20s, and 30s. And I can tell you, the topic of weight and diet comes up on the regular. We are all approaching our 50s in various stages of perimenopause and with a range of body types and weight. We also come from a time where the sayings were calories in, calories out, or you are what you eat. Now, I know up here that health, weight, and body image have a very complex relationship, much more complex than calories in, calories out. But I can assure you that when I can no longer fit into a pair of pants from last winter, it causes stress. Even when I know that midlife weight gain, in women at least, is biologically programmed for good reason, it is still difficult to accept. Perhaps some of you can relate. If so, then this stress that we may feel can only offer us a tiny glimpse of what people living in bigger bodies have dealt with most, if not all, of their lives. Now, yes, these conversations will be uncomfortable and awkward, but what is the alternative? Just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean we can't or won't talk about it. We are in a world where important things are discussed, and this is one of them. As an employee benefits advisor and a people leader, I am prepared to take steps toward change to help lead my clients, partners, colleagues, friends, and my father to places they might not have known to explore. We are in a unique position where we can change the future of our benefit plans. In this ever-evolving world of leading people, we need to continue to embrace the spirit of inclusion and show our compassion for those around us. We are all trying to do what we can to live our best lives in the bodies that house us. Let's be part of that change and the future to show our support to help make that best life a little bit better. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. A lot of very important information. Remember that if you do have questions for Nicole, feel free to get them submitted now, and we will save them for the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. So thanks again. And our next presenter is Adam Kelly. Adam is an executive commercial leader that has more than 20 years of experience in the health and wellness field, leading sales, marketing, product development, and client support teams. Adam has a deep industry knowledge across a broad spectrum of health solutions, including mental health, occupational health, workers' compensation, and disability management. Prior to joining the CloudMD team, Adam held leadership roles at Chappelle, FGI, Morneau Chappelle, and Mind Beacon. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and hello to everyone. Again, echoing Nicole's sentiments, thanks for everyone taking the time out of their day to join us today. First and foremost, thank you, Nicole. That was an outstanding presentation, and in 22 years of me being in this business, it's the first time that I've participated in a focused conversation around obesity and weight stigma, and certainly learned a ton from you today. So thank you for a great presentation. And I think it's a perfect segue into my presentation today, which will focus more around mental health solutions. And I think the topic of obesity is a perfect microcosm of the broader issue that we confront around mental health, and thinking about what we need to do as plan sponsors, as brokers, advisors, consultants, industry players. CloudMD is an organization that supports healthcare across the continuum. We do that with our employer partners. We support brokers and advisors coast to coast. We work with healthcare in the public sector, and we work with pharmaceutical organizations and carrier organizations across Canada. And mental health is a conversation piece in each one of those environments. Next slide. And the reason we're talking about this is an interesting one, and I want to stop on it for a second, and it may seem intuitive to everyone as a no-brainer, but I think it's an important one just to stop and reflect on for a second, particularly from the perspective of employers, brokers, advisors, carriers, plan sponsors. We're having this conversation because mental health is not adequately supported and funded by our public health system in Canada. Generally speaking, the bulk of individuals dealing with mental health are either responsible for paying for those services out of pocket or relying on employer plans for help, because the public health system simply is limited in what it provides for individuals that are dealing with anything from stress to depression, to anxiety, to obesity, and other chronic conditions that we see reflected in the mental health data. And we're starting to see some change in Canada. Certainly governments are starting to invest more into mental health. Pandemic certainly made it more topical in terms of conversation and shone a light on the issue that I think was something that was both merited by given the circumstances of the pandemic, but mental health as a rising issue in benefit plans has been something that far preceded the pandemic. I think the pandemic served to help accelerate some of the adoption of virtual strategies that are now becoming more commonplace in the workplace. but the issue still is far from resolved. And so as employers, we have a responsibility to fundamentally help employees, because short of them paying out of pocket, there is no help for people around their mental health. And it's an important acknowledgement that we need to make, because that is different from all the other chronic disease conditions that we're talking about in the context of health benefits, whether it's diabetes or cardiovascular disease, back pain, other things that are common issues, have that support through the public system. It doesn't exist in the mental health arena. So if we turn to the next slide. We're also in a period now that we're confronting unprecedented demand. And what I mean by that is more and more people are reaching out for help. And we see that through the data consistently, both pre-pandemic, throughout the pandemic, and post-pandemic. We are seeing that as a common trend line over the course of time, where more and more people are needing help. And not only more and more people needing help, but the severity of the conditions that they're seeking help for is increasing over time. Coupled with that, we have a scarcity of supply issue. We do not have enough people to help those that need it. And the most evident point of reference for that is in the public health system itself. Psychiatrists are covered under public health. If you have a referral from a GP to a psychiatrist, you can have that support funded through our public health system. The problem is, in some parts of Canada today, you may have up to 4-year wait time to see a psychiatrist. 4 years. And these are for individuals that are in high need of help. There just simply isn't enough people to support the system. And that goes for psychologists, social workers, and the entire ecosystem of support that's available, whether privately funded or publicly funded. There's not enough people to fuel the system. So when we think about the future of benefits, we need to start to rethink the ways that we're offering support and what our role is as employers, and doing what we can to help those that need it most. We also have, which is different from the public health system of chronic disease management, a very disconnected issue. A very common experience in mental health, and many of you would be familiar with this storyline, is you live with the condition or you live with the stress for years and years and years, to the point where you can no longer tolerate it and you reach out. And many people, their first point of reach out is to their GP, to their own attending physician. And the attending physician may or may not have you try a drug regimen to help you with some mood stabilization and help you normalize what you may be feeling, and will have a Rolodex of therapists that they may recommend you go and speak to. And if the individual chooses to go and seek that therapy and treatment, usually that fork in the road starts right there, where the therapist is no longer connected to the GP and you're down a diverging path of treatment. And that may exist for years, if not a lifetime, for individuals that are dealing with mental health as a chronic condition. Now, I think if I would have asked the audience today, how many people have heard the statistic 1 in 5? 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health episode in their lifetime. I think it underserves the prevalence of the issue. And because based on my own anecdotal experience, I think that number is far closer to 100% of people will suffer a mental health episode. All of us, at some point in our lives, will deal with profound stress that we could benefit from help with. And whether that's because we're caring for a loved one dealing with the issue directly, or we're dealing with relationship issues, or parenting issues, or grief and loss issues, or profound stress associated with the workplace and burnout that we hear is a prevalent issue, we all could benefit from seeing someone and getting help from different types of resources as we go through our lives. So it's an interesting conversation that I have with employers, because I constantly ask, why do you care? Why are we having this conversation around mental health? What's not working for you? As we go to the next slide. The answer is interesting, because typically when I ask employers what's most important to them, the first thing that they'll usually say is something like, well, we want to focus on prevention. And I then ask with the follow-up question, great, what are we trying to prevent? Because the difference between trying to prevent someone from developing or ultimately experiencing a depression or an anxiety as a chronic condition versus preventing that person from going off on disability is fundamentally two different things. So I think it's really important to challenge our thinking when we think about this and say, what are we actually trying to do? What are we actually trying to prevent? Because anyone in the audience that has either lived with it directly or has had a family, loved one that has dealt with mental health as a chronic condition likely knows that that started very, very early in life. And I've had the fortunate experience of dealing with my own anxiety issues over time. and I've had family members that have dealt with profound struggles over the course of their lives. And with my family, that started at ages of 10, 12 years old. So to suggest that I could have prevented that, or I wasn't a good enough parent, or we weren't good enough parents, or I could have done more to help that situation, is kind of a profound statement when I think about it looking backwards, because there's nothing I could have done more at the time to help. And those are things that we need to start to acknowledge, that when we're talking about prevention, often what we're talking about is really helping that individual manage a condition to prevent it from ending up in a disability or an experience that keeps them from being productive at work. And that's totally different in terms of a strategy. And yes, I think it's really important to also focus on tools around resiliency and managing stress and helping employees to be productive. I'm not dismissing that for a nanosecond. But I also think we need to balance the conversation by saying, when we're talking about prevention, we're often, as employers, concerned about the cost impact of mental illness. How much disability is driven by mental health? We know that it's the #1 driver, and we'll hear more from Rebecca from Medivie Blue Cross around that today. We know that mental health is the #1 driver of disability in workplaces. Not only is it a third of claims as a primary category, but it represents over 50% of lost time for most organizations. Over 50% of the days lost to disability and casual absenteeism due to mental health as a primary concern. Here's the problem. Most of those that end up in disability are dealing with mental health as a chronic disease. Back to Nicole's point around obesity and thinking of it as a chronic illness as opposed to lifestyle. It is absolutely the same stigma that, of course, we've tried to break down for 20 years in the mental health industry. This is not a choice. And most of these individuals that end up in disability, the 1 in 5 that is so commonly referenced, are people that are dealing with this over a long period of time, if not a lifetime. And our current employer-based supports are not well equipped to deal with it. There's a fundamental gap there. As an EAP provider at CloudMD, I understand the value of EAPs, but I can also be the first one to confirm for everyone on the call today that EAPs are not designed to support people that are dealing with a major depressive disorder that end up on disability, or anxiety, or post-traumatic stress, or eating disorders, or obesity. These are not what EAPs have been fundamentally designed to do. By nature, they're there to support short-term therapy, issues with your spouse, issues with your children, situational stress, short, in and out, help people create a plan, help them manage and move on. That's not what people that are dealing with a lifelong chronic condition around depression need. And they often need medication, and they often need ongoing support throughout a lifetime. And that support needs to be connected with the primary care system as well. So we have an issue that we need to, 1, acknowledge, and 2, think about addressing as we move forward with the design of our plans as it relates to mental health within organizations. Next slide. So I'm going to move relatively quickly through some of this just in the essence of time, but I think it's important, 1, to acknowledge that most organizations are not doing enough. And I understand that that's a challenge, because getting more money, more budget is a challenge for every organization in every respect. But I do think there's an opportunity to do more with the resources that we have. EAPs, great. Short-term, dealing with people to maintain productivity, help with situational stress, perfect resource. It can be a good accelerator or a good stepping stone into something longer term for those that need it. But when we're dealing with people that are really struggling long term and dealing with chronic illnesses, we need more. We need individuals that are properly trained to deal with those issues, and we need the funding mechanisms to be able to provide that care. Now, individuals and organizations can do that through mechanisms like extended health benefits or paramedical benefits, but we need to vastly broaden the interpretation of what that means, because not one size fits all in the area of mental health. Not everyone needs a psychologist, not everyone needs to see a psychiatrist, not everyone needs cognitive behavioral therapy. So making sure that our benefit plans are diverse enough to accommodate different types of professionals based on individual need is a really important part of how we need to think about it, because way too many plans today are limited in terms of what type of resources you need in order to qualify for benefits. The second problem with this is that as much as there are phenomenal therapists coast to coast to coast in Canada, if you send individuals out into the abyss of mental health therapists, there's 60,000 of them in Canada, we're disconnected from the rest of the public health system. There's no data control, there's no data inputs to help us understand whether is this really helping the individuals that need it? Is it making a material difference on our disability plans? And how do we create more connectivity with everything that we're trying to do from a mental health strategy? And that's not a slight by any stretch of the imagination on therapists, because they do phenomenal work. But unless we're capturing that data and making it integrated as part of our disability plans, our at-work strategies, connecting with the physician communities, we're missing the mark in terms of what the intention of these benefits are for. Next slide. So we need to start to think about it differently. EAPs have a role, like we've talked about, they're good for short-term therapy, but there's other things that are evolving out in the marketplace that I think organizations need to start to think about. Number one is having a control of your network around extended health benefits, making sure that those extended health benefits are connected through data more meaningfully to help us understand whether the work that we're doing is having the impact that we want it to have. Number two, we need to make sure that we diversify plans to make sure that there's enough in there to help individuals get access to the right type of resource. Often individuals are inappropriately diagnosed or not diagnosed at all. And most GPs by survey are not comfortable diagnosing mental health. So we need to get individuals in through that proper assessment, especially when they're struggling and especially in the pre-disability stages. That's where we can have some significant impact. Help them get properly assessed. Help them get a treatment plan that's going to work for them. And those are not things that are generally available through your EAP program. We need to think about using benefits differently to get to those individuals early. And certainly at the point of early disability, we need to make sure they're properly assessed and getting the help that they need. And we know that by doing that, we can have a dramatic impact on time loss, disability, LTD prevention, and getting to the economic bottom line that most organizations are looking for. Next slide. So there's a new way to think about this, and this is a reflection of where CloudMD is today, and there's other organizations that are moving similarly, and I think it's the trend line that we're starting to see from the health services part of what employer benefit plans look like. In the conventional world, we had an EAP, and maybe we had extended health plans that had $500 of coverage for mental health. That was the conventional plan for as long as I've been in the industry. We've seen a change, we've seen a trend line. Organizations are investing more into extended health benefits. There are some organizations, maybe perhaps with deep pockets than others, that have offered unlimited expenses against your mental health benefits and changing the way in terms of what providers can qualify for reimbursement, moving it away from just psychologists or psychiatrists and moving it to social workers and other designations of health professionals, mental health coaches that can be nurses as an example, that can provide phenomenal value. So we're seeing a shift in the trend line around what types of services are available through benefits and the wallet share extended to those benefits. We also saw the rapid adoption of telemedicine in the course of the pandemic, unlike I've ever seen the adoption of any other service over the course of 20 years of being in this business. And that was a reflection of the world that we lived in as a part of the pandemic. No one had a choice but to move to virtual adoption as part of the strategy. The challenge is, and I think Nicole hit it on it as part of her presentation as well, is it's very rarely that cut and dry when it comes to mental health. Obesity has comorbidities with depression. Diabetes has phenomenally high comorbidity with depression. Back pain, any kind of pain, chronic pain issue, has people suffering from a depression and an anxiety perspective. So creating an ecosystem on the next slide, where we start to think about these things more holistically, is really where the future of benefits is. Individuals shouldn't have to choose whether I need to go to an EAP or do I go to my telemedicine provider? Do I use my benefits? What kind of benefits do I need? What kind of provider do I need? It is far too complicated for the average individual. And individuals don't know where to start down this journey. And in fact, they often don't know where to go when they're 25, 50% into the journey. And it's an ongoing journey. So rethinking these programs and making it far easier for individuals to say, you don't need to think about what support you need. We partner with an organization that's going to help you navigate around all the things that we make available to you as an organization. And we're going to make sure you get the right support. And we're going to think about that more globally in terms of your physical and mental health and how that relates to the workplace. And how do we best help you navigate some of these services? And better leveraging both what's available in extended health plans, EAP plans, public healthcare resources. No one's connecting the dots. And working with organizations that understand that and starting to become an advocate of connecting those dots is a really important role for employers. And certainly as a self-promotional pitch, we can do that at CloudMD, and there's other organizations that can do that. But it's an important mindset shift for organizations to start to lead to, because the more programs we add, the more layers we add to these health benefit programs, the more confusing it is for employees in terms of where to go and when to go and what kind of help they need. So I'll leave you with a couple of just closing thoughts in the next couple of slides, and we'll turn it over to Rebecca. First and foremost, we need to make sure that the market, that the industry is moving towards evidence-based data. We need to make sure that the services that we're offering to our employees are working. And yes, understanding utilization is important, and understanding satisfaction surveys are important. But that's been basically the market standard for 25 years while I've been in this business from an EAP perspective. No one has measured the clinical outcomes. Are people actually getting better? And is it helping mitigate the risk of disability? And if they're off on disability, are we getting people back? So we need to be far more data-driven in our strategies. And I've shared in the deck, and I won't go through them because of time today. Next slide. That there's lots of evidence that's out there today to suggest that we can move towards a world where vendors are held accountable for data. We need to show that we are providing evidence-based care. We are helping people clinically get better. And not only clinically getting better, but on the next slide is also moving to the economic outcomes. We're actually driving impact in terms of reducing disability, reducing LTD incidents, getting people back to work faster, and reducing the cost burden to organizations. And that data exists. So the ask and the takeaway again today is rethink this and hold us accountable and make sure that we're connecting to, as a plan sponsor, as brokers, as advisors, one, make it easier for employees, two, hold vendors accountable for the data and make sure that what we're doing is actually providing the desired outcome, helping people with better health and helping you as an organization or as a business have better economic business results. So I'm going to leave it at that, Kristen, and can transition back to you. And thanks everyone for listening in.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Again, a lot of great information. So if you have questions for Adam, feel free to submit those into the question pane of the control panel now, and we will get to those as soon as we get to the Q&A session. So our final presenter is Rebecca Smith. Rebecca brings more than 25 years of disability management experience and progressive leadership to her role as Director of Group Life and Disability Services at Medavie Blue Cross. In this senior management position, she is responsible for a number of disciplines, including rehabilitation services, new business onboarding, sales support, and business analysis. Rebecca draws on an extensive background in claims management, quality assurance, and training. Over to you, Rebecca.
Great. Thank you very much, Kristen. And thank you, Adam and Nicole. I think we'll find that there are a number of areas where we align in our presentations and the information that we're bringing forward today. If you want to go to the first slide, Kristen. So Medavie Blue Cross is a premier all-in-one carrier that provides health, dental, travel, life, and disability benefits. And in addition to supporting Canadians with individual and employer-provided private insurance plans, we also administer federal and provincial government-sponsored health programs. And together with Medavie Health Services, we're part of Medavie, a health solutions partner committed to improving the well-being of Canadians. We were named Canada's Life and Health Insurer of the Year for 2021 and one of Canada's most admired corporate cultures. As a not-for-profit organization, we don't have shareholders. Instead, we proudly invest in our members, our employees, and our communities to help address some of Canada's most pressing healthcare challenges. We've been named one of Canada's top 100 employers as an organization that leads our industry in offering an exceptional workplace to our employees. And we've been certified by Imagine Canada as one of Canada's caring companies, a designation that places our not-for-profit organization among the nation's leaders in community service and corporate philanthropy. You go to the next slide. When employees go on disability, providing timely access to treatment can make all the difference in their recovery and their return to work. Mental health concerns continue to be the top driver of disability claims as they were before the pandemic. And according to a recent study from CAMH, 25.1% of survey participants reported feeling moderate to severe anxiety, significantly higher than the 19% that were reported in the last survey that was completed in July 2021. So we're seeing this trend just continuing upwards. We also have an issue with the hospitals being full. Prior to the pandemic, we were already nearing capacity. Since the pandemic, we're either near capacity or at capacity, with resources being used for COVID-19 care while non-urgent cases continue to be delayed. Next slide, please. There's more than just the obvious costs of the mental health crisis on an organization. Mental health related disability is a huge and costly problem with multiple and direct and indirect impacts. And I'm sure there's lots of people here who have seen a slide similar to this in the past that speaks to, it's not just about the disability claims. It's about, the overstaffing that has to go on, the temporary workers we have to hire, recruitment and retraining, and all these things that are a consequence of the mental health issues that we're experiencing. We also have an issue of presenteeism. So these are the employees who show up to work and they work at 50% of capacity because they're not well. So they aren't able to work to their fullest. And we also have an impact on those that are left behind. So if one person on every 10-member team goes out on disability, the work still needs to be done by the other 9. So this takes a toll on them. It takes a whole toll on their health and on their productivity as well. Next slide. Disability claims across all Canadian insurers increased about 5% in 2020, slightly higher than the average growth rate over the past 5 years of less than 4%. This is according to the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association. What we're seeing is not only are we seeing more claims, but claims are becoming more complex following the pandemic. And we see on this list a number of things that are driving that. So new things that we experienced throughout the course of the pandemic that have impacted our health. Next slide. So mental and physical health is fundamentally linked, and you would have heard Adam talk about this. There are multiple associations between mental health and chronic physical conditions that significantly impact people's quality of life, the demands on healthcare and other publicly funded services, and generate consequences to society. The World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The WHO states that there is no health without mental health. Nowhere is the relationship between mental and physical health more evident than in the area of chronic conditions. The associations between mental and physical health are poor mental health is a risk factor for chronic physical conditions. People with serious mental health conditions are at a high risk of experiencing chronic physical conditions, and people with chronic physical conditions are at risk of developing poor mental health. The social determinants of health impact both chronic physical conditions and mental health. Key aspects of prevention include increasing physical activity, access to nutritious foods, ensuring adequate income, and fostering social inclusion and social support. This creates opportunities to enhance protective factors and reduce risk factors related to aspects of mental and physical health. Understanding those links between the mind and body is the first step in developing strategies to reduce the incidence of coexisting conditions and support those that are already living with mental illness and chronic physical conditions. Next slide. At Medavie, we believe that by providing the right approach and support to employees seeking disability management services, we can optimize their health and improve their chances of returning to work full-time. The longer an employee remains out of the workplace, the more challenging that return to work becomes. Next slide. So prevention is key in successful management of disability, followed by early intervention. Ensuring that immediate access to benefits and the tools that will help a member stay at work while addressing any health issues is important. The key to a strong recovery is proactive treatment, and this will allow for a member to come back to work healthy and confident. It's important to mitigate the burden of disability, not only for the employee, but also for the employer. This results in a decrease in absence during the duration of the disability, and it minimizes the financial impact and reduces the development of secondary issues. Next slide. So our disability management commitment. We provide direct, consistent employer and employee communication. We believe that that communication is absolutely key to the success of our disability management. We follow a proven, focused approach to advancing claims to a successful return to work. We have a robust network of resources and service providers to facilitate assessments and optimize return to health and return to work for employees. We ensure easy access to unique self-care resources for employees to help improve their health. We meet and exceed agreed upon deliverables and timelines for quality and service assurance standards, and we develop compassionate health-based relationships with employees to provide the best outcome for every individual. And that communication comes into that, in that we truly believe that that relationship with the individual that we're helping on that road to recovery is an important step in getting them back to the workplace. Next slide. So to manage through all the external factors that we've talked about, ultimately employers need to work with a disability provider who's going to effectively manage claims today and find ways to prepare for the future to ensure that disability expenses don't become unsustainable. We've talked about, the need for the resources and the costs of the program. So, we need to be able to help our members while protecting our plans as well. There are a number of ways that we're doing that at Medavie Blue Cross. So we're keenly focused on what adaptations will help to counteract the trends that we're seeing in overall claims. Mental health obviously is the most prominent example of what we're seeing today. And these claims are not reducing, they are increasing, and I believe we're going to continue to see that trend continue. So we have invested a lot in our resources in terms of will we handle mental health claims, understanding what we're seeing and improving on how we manage those claims. And we found a number of innovative partners who are able to deliver results for us, allowing us to significantly decrease the average claims durations for mental health claims. We're also using new technologies, providing better opportunities for our disability management. We're using pharmacogenetics tools to help us individually target the drugs some claimants are recommended to use for mental health claims. With this process, the employee's genetic makeup is analyzed against a series of drugs to assess which are most likely have the intended impact. And this can avoid them being prescribed a treatment, waiting several weeks for results, only to discover that the person's not going to see results. So we see a huge potential from this sort of individualized treatment, including better, faster health results for the employee and lower disability costs for the plan. And technology is something you expect to hear more and more about in the disability management area. For example, we now deliver an industry-leading web-based form of cognitive behavioral therapy program. And this allows our members to be that are diagnosed with anxieties or depressions to get that clinically proven treatment from the comfort of their own homes. Next slide, please. Innovation is the cornerstone of what we're doing at Medavie Blue Cross. So we have a number of innovative tools to help members return to work or prevent them from going off work. For mental health claims, we do have a partnership with Medica, and this partnership has seen a 28% reduction in our short-term disability claims, transitioning to long-term disability claims. Medica helps expedite psychiatric assessments and treatment, and it's an early intervention tool. And we heard talk about, the shortages in the area of psychiatrists and the need to get the right diagnosis for individuals in order to provide that treatment. So what this program involves is an initial assessment to determine if a psychiatric evaluation is warranted, and if it is, then there's an appointment with a psychiatrist within the first 2 weeks of an approved claim, so that we're getting people the right diagnosis and the right treatment recommendations very quickly. After the assessment, the psychiatrist actually communicates with the family physician, so both in writing and through a conversation with the family doctor, so that we have that relationship. So if the doctor has questions, because again, we talked about the fact they don't necessarily have the expertise, we've provided the expertise to them to help them to support their patient in ensuring their recovery from mental health conditions. In addition to our mental health resources, we have rehabilitation specialists who are regularly reviewing our files and looking where we can provide additional treatments for claimants. So they have expertise on treatments, how to expedite access to those treatments, diagnostic testing, and they look for what's available in that employee's community. So we're, again, bringing that treatment to them. And as Adam talked about, there's a silver lining to the pandemic in that there was an acceleration and adoption of virtual care. So we're able to provide more services to claimants in their own homes without having to look for resources outside their communities where they may be in a community that's smaller and doesn't have as many resources available. We're also very excited about our relationship with Medical Confidence and their navigation services. So Medical Confidence is helping our claimants navigate the healthcare system and identify available appointments with specialists that are getting our claimants in to see those experts on a quicker basis so that they can begin their recovery and get them the best possible outcome. And then as we outlined here today, technology-enabled solutions can be applied across the healthcare continuum to help members self-manage their chronic conditions and navigate healthcare systems and reduce the wait times to see specialists. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd share a case study just to sort of share some of the experience of what we saw during the course of the pandemic. So our case study here is an individual who is a truck driver who became disabled in the fall of 2020. He sustained a concussion during a hockey game, and he had symptoms of anxiety and depression occurring. And what we saw sort of evolve in this individual's claim was, we're seeing the recovery from the concussion symptoms, but we were also proceeding into a lockdown again. And what we saw was strains in the relationships at home. We had an individual who was very active, the gym's closed, he became obsessed with the media. And I know I did a lot of reading at the beginning of the pandemic about, COVID and what is this? And, how are we protecting ourselves and treating it? Well, this individual started to read for 8 to 10 hours a day, researching about COVID online. He became vaccine hesitant. He became upset with the government about the restrictions and the pandemic measures that were put in place. And all of this had a spiraling effect for this individual. So while the initial concussion was resolving, the mental health condition was deteriorating significantly. Next slide. So here's what we did. So he had a therapist, but it was very infrequent. So we ramped up the frequency of his treatments. We were having him seen once a week instead of on a monthly basis. We increased what the other resources available to him. So we put a kinesiologist in place as well with a clinic that had gym facilities. And Robert was actually one of the first people in his province to be able to access a gym for medical reasons during a lockdown, during the pandemic. And then as we saw the recovery starting to happen, we implemented another psychologist, one that was really focused on the anger difficulties that he was having about the government restrictions and how the pandemic was being handled. And we saw a very quick turnaround for Robert. So within 10 weeks, he stopped binging on the social media. His sleep was improving. He was less angry, had more concentration, and he started to prepare for that return to work and to accept his situation. And ultimately, Robert chose to get his vaccinations and he successfully returned to work. And I think this just demonstrates that there was a lot of creativity needed during the pandemic. And we continue to need that creativity today because we're still dealing with some of the complications of what people experienced during the course of the pandemic, even though the world around us is opening back up. Next slide. At Medavie Blue Cross, we know the importance of proactively working with plan members towards their return to health and return to work. This approach can have a profound impact. We know that collaboration, coordination, and communication is the cornerstone to sustainable recovery, and that there is opportunity to align with the objectives of a plan sponsor to provide sustainable outcomes, shorter claims durations, and effective plan cost management. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And thanks to all of our speakers for taking the time to share their knowledge and insights with us today. I will ask Adam and Nicole to come back on camera, and we will open it up to questions from the audience. So as you can see on your screen here, if you do have questions, please enter them into the question pane of the control panel. You have the ear of 3 very intelligent experts right now at your fingertips, so get those questions in. Okay, so our first question is, as the cost of benefit plans increase, how can we help plan sponsors and members understand the importance of prevention? Anyone want to take that one?
I'll take it first, as I spoke about it earlier, and you know, in the essence of the what are we preventing kind of conversation that we started earlier. And I think it really is important for employers. That's fundamentally, to me, the role of what EAP programs and others are for, is to help in that early stage by creating awareness, by creating information, and making that information super accessible. You know, we're all inundated by emails and messages all day long, and so I understand the difficulty in communicating with our employees, but I don't think that we can underestimate the value of consistently promoting the things that are already available to us. Because mental health is one of those things, unless you're ready to take action, as an example, you ignore those messages, you ignore those emails until the time that you need it, and then it's difficult. So I think that persistency in communication is the fundamental backbone of any good prevention strategy, and creating information and awareness. People have to be ready to ingest that information, and they'll only do so when at their own schedule. So it's important that we create that consistency and promotion around the things that are already available. We all go to the gym or go for a walk or go for a ride or do something to maintain good physical health. And mental health is no different. We all need to be active in maintaining our good mental health. And that means taking time out for ourselves, and means, you know, engagement in mindfulness apps. It means engagement in going for a walk. It means engagement with a therapist from time to time. There's no shame. In fact, it's a you know, I think we don't do any justice to ourselves if we don't do something to maintain good mental health every single day of our lives. And it's no different than taking good care of our physical health every day of our lives. So to me, prevention is all around building blocks around consistency and application. And us as employers, as plan sponsors, number one thing we can do is continue to communicate and make people aware of what's already available to them. Our role as vendors is to also make sure of what's available, not just as us as CloudMD, as an EAP provider or a mental health provider, but to also create more awareness around what's already existing in the broader public health community. There is so much available to us. The problem is it's completely disconnected and no one knows how to access it effectively. Organizations like ourselves, Medavie Blue Cross, and others can help.
And I think I would add on in terms of, you know, we've talked a lot about mental health. When I look at preventing disability claims from the physical side, I think that's something our employers need to be very aware of right now. These long surgical delays are preventing people from getting back to the normal. So the importance of looking at the ability to accommodate these employees is more critical than ever. How can we go about being creative in accommodation, knowing that our healthcare system isn't going to be helping us too soon because of the backlogs that exist following the pandemic?
Great, thank you. And do you see a role for community-based services like CMHA, MHCC, working with carriers and plan sponsors?
Yeah, again, I'll just jump in on that one because I have such an emphatic yes to that. I spoke about it earlier. There's a fundamental disconnection between public health services and private health services around mental health in Canada today. And every organization that's engaged in promoting or supporting direct treatment and care needs to do a better job of connecting with the others. So to me, that circle of care, that coordination of care is the most important thing that we can try to do better at as private organizations, as public health organizations, or those that sit somewhere in between. So for sure, I think unquestionably, when it comes to awareness campaigns, when it comes to supporting treatment strategies, assessment strategies, we all need to do a better job recognizing that this is going to be a two-tiered system for our foreseeable future around mental health. And there is no avoiding the fact that we need to work better together. And those organizations that make that commitment will succeed, and those that don't will not, because it's an inevitable consequence of how the system's evolving.
Great, thank you. And Nicole, this one is specifically for you. We have an attendee that 100% agrees with you, but let's play devil's advocate. The employer says, why should my plan cover my employees who is not taking any other steps first to help with their obesity issue before the magic pill per se? This is what we're hearing all the time. Is it just the right thing to do, and will it help with productivity?
Well, the answer to the is it the right thing to do is yes. I would also challenge that to question whether that really is the only thing that this employee is doing. How does an employer know that? And unless they're having those conversations with that employee, and asking, what have you tried so far? What are you doing? But it harkens back to the comment I made with the employer who says, well, that drug isn't working because they're still fat. They have literally no idea what this person has been going through and what they have tried. One of the common myths out there is that we can eat our way out of being fat. In other words, we can shrink our body by eating less and moving more. And that's just not the case. Typically, diets don't work for people. And the focus on that, unfortunately, that's what most people think is going to work. And it doesn't necessarily work. There are so many other factors involved. So it's the right thing to do to put it on the plan. Again, do you tell someone who has high blood pressure that they can't have that medication until they've done this, this, and this? Probably not. So we really just need to shift our thinking on that and remove the barriers for people. There's no reason to have them. 25 years ago, we may not have covered depression meds on a plan. That's unthinkable now. Unthinkable. So the anti-obesity medication needs to get to that place where it is unthinkable to not cover them.
Great, thank you. And in larger organizations, we often see a competition, if not a disconnect, between the CFO and the CHRO. And the CFO typically holds the hammer. How can we satisfy the objectives of both in the best or most efficient manner?
I think that you have to be able to articulate the value of the offering to the CFO. I mean, the money can talk too. There's value. I mean, we put these programs in place to help people recover more quickly. I mean, I listened to Nicole talking about the obesity, and all I can think is when those people get to my team, that's an expensive proposition, because those people are going to have a long journey to recovery because we haven't helped them with the initial condition, because by the time they get to us, it's usually a secondary condition. And those are long claims. So, I think you have to be able to articulate the value, and your insurer should be able to help you articulate the value of the programs that they're offering, so that you have a solid case of why it's a good investment.
Yeah, agreed. And I would echo that for sure, Rebecca, and suggest that a lot of what Rebecca talked about in terms of the partnerships they have with groups like Medica and Medical Confidence, which is one of the CloudMD subset organizations. We're tracking the impact on disability collectively in terms of incidence rates, in terms of duration of disability, impact on LTD claims. The mitigation of one LTD claim can be tens of thousands of dollars in terms of impact, and certainly on premiums over time. And that's ultimately what the CFOs are looking for, is everything's is a wash until you can show hard dollar savings to the CFO. And whether that's in the form of, we can actually carry less labor because we've been able to get people more productive and back at work faster, or we've actually reduced our LTD premiums or stabilized our benefits increases over time. It's the dollars that speak to the CFO, as we all know. And again, I mentioned it earlier in my presentation. I think that data is out there now, and collectively we all need to do a better job of holding our vendors like us and Medivy and others accountable, but also making sure that we're supporting it as plan sponsors and making that data available and working together to show that data story, because it does exist and these solutions do work, and they do need to be data driven over time, and ultimately it leads to better business performance, and we can show that through demonstrated ROI to the CFOs. Helping people is good for business.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you say is the major shift that you've seen in the service delivery?
I mean, I can jump in terms of service delivery of like mental health services, or
Yeah, anything really, the services throughout the benefit plans, anything that the benefit plans offer.
I think, again, I talked to, the ability to go into people's homes and provide the services to them in their homes was the biggest thing. And honestly, it was amazing to watch during the course of the pandemic, how quickly our service providers evolved, right? Like, I thought, okay, so we already had ICBT, so that's a little bit easier. We're already doing mental health virtually. But how quickly the therapies for some of our physical conditions went to virtual therapies as well was pretty amazing and impressive.
I would
Great.
agree. Yeah, just my only add, it would be that clearly the adoption of virtual as a mechanism for both mental and physical health is the biggest change we've seen in the last couple of years. But I think that will right size as well, right? I think there are, obviously physicians are going to expect to see their patients in their offices more often, and not every physical health condition can be managed through a virtual issue, nor can mental health for that matter. So I think, the real evolution that we're seeing here is how the adoption of virtual is now starting to come together with what we used to know as more in-person services. The ability to be fluid across your delivery modalities is going to be really important over time. What I mean by that is leveraging asynchronous messaging, in person, virtual, telephonic, video. The ability to do that within an individual across time is going to be really important as we think about the delivery mechanisms of what we offer to our employees.
Great. And how do I know my investment in workplace health and wellness benefits is paying off?
ROI? Are you actually mitigating disability? Are you reducing your turnover? Ultimately, the business performance metric is, are we able to produce more with the same amount of people or less, right? Like, that's back to the CFO, right? At the end of the day, these strategies need to make the business better. And the business, unfortunately, is generally measured by dollars and cents. And are we producing more for less? And that means, like, are we reducing our costs around disability? Are we reducing our turnover rates because turnover is expensive and ends up in tons of lost productivity? Are we able to attract more talent easier, faster? I think they're all really important metrics that are ultimately the barometer, but at the end of the day, it's the business performing better as a consequence. And we need to be able to draw that direct link in dollars and cents.
I concur. And Adam, I really appreciate your comment about needing the data and holding the vendors accountable. Everybody, even a 25 life group, needs to know, is this EAP working? Are people accessing it? If not, why not? Is it too confusing? Is it not accessible? So we do need that data. That is imperative, even at the small level.
Great, thank you. And we only have about 1 minute left. I know we have a lot of questions coming in, but I think I'll leave it with this. I'm going to put each one of you on the spot and let you give your final thoughts and key takeaways. And maybe you can tell the attendees what is the one thing you could do immediately, maybe today, this week, or next month, as a first step towards changing the future of our benefit plans. So, Rebecca, I will start with you.
All right. Well, I think first of all, my key takeaway is it was wonderful, presenting with Nicole and Adam. And while we all wear different hats, I think we're very aligned. And I think the thing that I take away is really from some of the questions that, these are questions that, you know, are coming forward. They're probably questions our own groups have, potentially, that making sure that we're really articulating our ROI and partnering with individuals that can help us articulate that ROI.
Great. And Nicole?
I would say, again, I'm echoing Rebecca's comments too about the synergy between the three of them. And my one takeaway, and I feel what everybody could do, in the next 15 minutes even, is reduce your bias. Reduce your bias about people who live in bigger bodies. Reduce your bias with people who have mental health issues. Reduce your bias, people who are on disability. We are all carrying stigma, and we don't need to. And if we can't do that, we can't do the other things. We can't create a communication plan. We can't promote inclusivity. So that is 100% the first step.
Thank you. And Adam, I'll leave it with you.
Parting thoughts, sure. Number one, make it easier for your employees. And whether you choose to do that by working with less vendors under one ecosystem of delivery, or working with a consistent access point at the front end for all the things that you offer as an employee, to make sure that it's effectively navigated, those are organizational decisions, but we have to make it easier for employees, make it easier for them to access regardless of issues, physical, mental, or both. And number two, demand more data out of your relationships, because we have to be data driven in our strategies.
Thank you. So unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. If your question was not answered, I will be passing them along to the speakers and sponsor company, and someone will follow up with you directly. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a big thank you to Rebecca, Nicole, and Adam, and of course our sponsors, Novo Nordisk, CloudMD, and Medivie Blue Cross for their hard work and support leading up to today's virtual event. Thank you all. We
Thank
hope
you.
that you leave us having learned some new and valuable information. At the end of today's webinar, you will be prompted to answer a short survey. We encourage you to give your honest feedback to help us with future planning. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and please stay safe, everyone. Thank you.